my presentation on in-place record management, we're going to go over a few different bits and pieces. I have left questions at the end, and I do tend to talk fast. So please, I'm not afraid of questions at the end, so have a think about those during the presentation. So IP Australia, we look after patents, trademarks, plant breeder rights, and patents. And we've been around for over 100 years in various guises. We were once the patent office, and we've evolved in that space. So we have over 100 years of data, records, and information that we need to look after, store, and use on behalf of the Australian people. And we engage in the intellectual property community across the globe. So organisations such as the World Intellectual Property Organisation and other IP offices around the world, we do a lot of data and information sharing with those organisations. So when anyone applies for a patent or a trademark or any of those rights, they have to apply with a whole lot of content that we then have to examine, and then we have to store and keep that information and then also make it publicly accessible. So we're largely an unclassified environment, and we have a whole lot of unstructured and structured information. So one of the reasons that I think I've landed here today is because of my background in records, information, and data management. So a long time ago, and I don't know if Lynn Murray's in the room here, I saw her earlier today, and this has been a great conference for connecting with people in my past in various different guises. So I first started working in the public service back in the year 2000 when Senator Harradine, partial sale of Telstra, we got some money in Tasmania, so we had to set up a thing called the National Oceans Office. Now, as part of setting up any organisation, you have to come up with a business classification scheme, BCSs. And so we had 20, I can remember that part of the organisation. We went through this process, identified all the different things that we needed to look after, from stakeholder management to government relationships to thinking about all the different marine industries. And so we had a BCS and we had paper files, and they were managed in TRIM. And I used to have to go and get my paper file, collect all the information about who I engaged with on a marine park or marine park planning process, and physically put that onto a file. So that was kind of my first interaction with record management systems. After doing that for quite a long time, I then moved to Hydro Tasmania. Hydro Tasmania were just about to kick off with a SAP implementation and implement OpenText as a solution. So again, working with people who I've seen here again, with Chrome Consulting and other vendors, we implemented OpenText ECM. And I was part of the migration, identifying the metadata for the unstructured data and moving that across from existing systems into Content Manager at the time. And then I got to look after the information management team alongside my data analytics team and went through an uplift into what was then called Suite 16 in the OpenText world. And again, people were expected to work, this time digitally, but go and work out where their file was in the OpenText world, move that content into somewhere in that file plan area, and then keep it and use it. And that was really at the forefront of some digital uses of record-keeping purposes. Now, Hydro, 80, 100, maybe probably 120 years of history, and lots of unstructured data that was physically kept and needed to be looked after, lots of amazing photos about locations where dams had been built, those sorts of things. So lots of unstructured and non-digital content as well as digital content. Now, after that wonderful time, just before COVID, time for a change. So I moved into the vendor space and I worked for a fabulous little company, Circle T, and built my understanding of how to use the Microsoft 365 technology stack. So I delivered that during those wonderful COVID times to customers across Australia and spent a little bit of time working with the Microsoft team across Asia, so delivering that functionality. So again, learning how to use an in-place record management solution for anyone in where they work. And then have moved to IP Australia. Now, just before there's yet another person from my past. So when I moved to IP Australia a year ago, my team were data analytics, data engineering, building data platform and AWS, all the structured data things. And within about 2 months of turning up, I had the opportunity to take responsibility on for records management, so I did. So now look after Wicca, who's in the room, and the information governance capability. So thinking about things from a unstructured and structured world together, which when I get to the end of my presentation and mention the word generative AI, I think there's some reasons for being able to do that. So that's the about me bit. Now, my context now is within the Australian Public Service. Now, I don't know how many people went to the presentation before lunch and looked at what the National Archives give us guidance on, which is about building that trust in public records and making sure that we are all doing the right thing as Australian government employees and making sure that we're managing our information and content in the right way. There's this building trust in public record policy that came out around a year ago, and that identifies key requirements for managing all of the Australian government information assets. So our records, our information, all of our data. And that guidance helps us determine how we should not only create, but collect and manage and be able to use all of that rich information that we store, and it's surveyed on an annual basis. So once a year we get asked, how are you complying with our checkup rules, and we make small incremental improvements between last year and this year. But there's obviously a whole lot of change in this space. As we're moving to digital ways of working completely, and in an organisation like IP Australia, where we are very, very spread out across Australia, we've got a whole lot of work to do about giving guidance and support to our staff and the people who interact with us about how to work in this digital first way, and where should they be keeping, storing, collecting, managing all of the rich content and information that they collect and use. So coming into this role of a CDO, there's a fair bit of confusion about what is the remit of this role. Should we really be looking at the unstructured versus the structured space? And I think I'm a bit of a rarity in the public service for a CDO that is looking after both of the unstructured and structured world. And I've made the point in doing that. So we're building out our next iteration of a data strategy. But it's not a data strategy anymore. It's a data information analytics strategy. And I've had to make it that explicit because previously we had information matters as our strategy, and people thought that was just about information. And before that we had a data strategy, and people thought that was just about the zeros and ones. So by using all those words with intent, we are now saying that as a team and as an organisation, we need to be thinking about the unstructured and the structured world. There's also a lot of confusion about what do we need to be governed and how are we supporting our staff to comply to those rules. So not very many of us know that in our organisation, what is our disposal schedule and how long should we be keeping information for, and where should that information be stored and managed? So I, as somebody who has this as a responsibility, I know that we have about 7 disposal schedules plus the general one, whose name I've forgotten. Thank you. And we have content that we have to keep for a minimum of 2 years, and we have content that we need to keep for over 20. Now, because we're not dealing with a lot of personal, private information, we don't have the same obligations of a health department or an education department or somebody who's dealing with that rich customer information. We're a largely unclassified environment, but we still have obligations around what we are doing with that information, how long we are storing it for, but also what shouldn't we be storing? So what is our normal administrative practice? How are we helping people identify the stuff that we actually don't need to keep? And so we've got a long way to go. Thinking about reusable content versus disposal. So we have in our back end of our systems a lovely rule that says, keep it for 7 years. But what if we don't need to? What if we can be disposing it after 2 or not even keeping it for 2 years? How are we able to identify and use that? And what does it actually mean for generative AI? So I also lead the generative AI working group across our organisation, and one of the first proof of concepts we're going to do in that space is thinking about how we might automate the process of creating a position description. So I don't know how many people have played with ChatGPT or other products and solutions. We've got a little tenancy, a little proof of concept environment, and we're going to bring in a version of ChatGPT onto our tenancy, and then we're going to train it to do some simple business operation steps. Now, obviously, we want to be training it on the right material. We want the information to be trusted, to be reusable, to be content that is meaningful. We don't want things that are half versions or something because we haven't got version control established properly. We want to be comfortable that when we're looking for new kinds of patent examiners, because we do a lot of recruitment, particularly in the examination space, that we've modernised those position descriptions to be reflective of what is currently coming in. And we can only do that if we've got the right information being used in our generative AI models. So then we probably need to rethink about our disposal again. What should we be keeping? Why should we be keeping it? Who needs to use it? So a whole lot of change, and I guess from a Chief Data Officer perspective, that means obviously thinking about that rich data landscape and understanding what are all of the different use cases we have, not just for our structured data, but also for our unstructured data. And then obviously, all of these wonderful new ways of working. So I've already mentioned, so I live in Hobart. Most of my team live somewhere between Brisbane and Adelaide. I've got a little cohort in Canberra. Very few of them ever attend the office. How do I help support those people, not just in my team, but across the organisation, to be able to work in a digital way and understand where they should be putting their information? Or are we just going to let them work wherever they want, and we'll come along with the hundreds and thousands of people I have in my records management team to make sure that we're doing the right things? Because let's face it, no one has enormous information governance teams. I have 2 people. I have 10 who do data analytics. I have another 8 who do data engineering for me. So we're talking about a very, very, very small group of people who need to support over 1,000 people across the organisation to do the right thing. How can we be helping them to do that? So in-place records management, it's a really, really, really interesting concept. And it sounds like it's going to be this amazing panacea for this problem that we all have around helping people to work where we want them to work and to do the right things with the record that they have. Now, if you're going to do this step, there's a whole lot of work and a whole lot of questions you need to be asking yourself and asking the teams that are supporting you to do this. Where do your staff work? And I don't mean their physical locations. Are they in SharePoint? Are they in OneDrive? Are they in Confluence? Are they in your AWS cloud? Are they still on their hard drive? Are they, how are they working? And how do they currently maintain a record? And what things have you done to help them do that? So we've just done a project. We've moved out of our Objectives on-premise instance into SharePoint with Record Point as our record management solution. Fantastic. But have we thought about where our staff are actually working? And have we done really simple things like switched off the connection from email to Objective so that people stop putting stuff there because it's not longer a system of record any longer? So need to think about that end-to-end solution. Moving your content. So I've done a data migration into OpenText, I've done them into Microsoft, I've done them into a couple of other solutions. And it's really important that you think about what it is you're going to move and why. So we moved a whole lot of content from Objective, our record management system, into the Inplace record management solution. And then we decided we'd move everything sitting on our G drive also into SharePoint, but they weren't going to be records. So we've created this wonderful situation where we've got content that we know are records, and then we have content that may not be a record, but it could be a record. And so we've got a whole lot of work as a very small team of people to try and identify what actually should or could or might be a record versus the stuff that we know and we're comfortable with. Business classification schemes. How do you help people work in the right place? All of us went online over the last couple of years, but did we think about what kind of business structures we wanted for that content to be living in. What did you set up as your business classification scheme? Was it exactly what you already had in your file, in your record management system, or was it how you were functionally working? And what did you do to show people and help people understand where they could and should be working? So right now, again, we have this wonderful experience where people start working from OneDrive, and then they maybe have to move that record once it's signed and endorsed into somewhere in SharePoint so that it is in a record folder. How are we helping people to work in that digital way? It would be better for me as the person responsible for this having to say, yes, we're doing the right things, if we actually showed people that if you start your content creation from the record folder, because it is going to be a business record, because it's an official piece of content, you start working there and then it lives there, and then you don't have to move it. You can start from one place. Thinking about those things. And then there's that building that understanding with the information governance professionals around using this modern technology and really understanding how it works. So for most people, when there's a technology implementation, it's done with people from the technology team, and the record management team might have an opportunity to play alongside that and give advice as SMEs, but then they're the ones who are left with capturing an implementation. What we found is that we weren't able to give the advice at the time around, well, we need to be thinking about more than just how we used to do things in the past. How do we want to help support people going forward? So strongly encourage anyone who's doing these implementations to make sure you've got the right people in the room asking the questions from a record management solution perspective, so that when someone says, hey, what's your Harradine report for this year, you've got the ability to find that information and be able to present it to you. You're not chasing your tail because the implementation's been considered from a technology perspective, not actually from a SME and record management perspective. And then I keep harping on about the generative AI solution in your organisation, because you're all going to do it. There's not going to be an organisation in Australia that isn't going to touch something with generative AI in the next year or 2 years, maybe 3 years, but it's going to happen. And so we've started that journey with our information governance team to try and give us the ability to identify the core, not necessarily rules, but a bit of a framework around, well, if we're going to be putting our information about certain HR aspects, so processes, de-identified content, into a generative AI so that we can test some of these business processes, what do you as record managers want us to be doing, to be considering around that? Do you want us to be using the actual record, or do you want us to be using a version that might have been a draft or something different? How do you want us to work? Keep that in mind, because that's something that is going to hit everybody over the next little while. So I've talked a little bit about our journey here. So as mentioned, we've recently upgraded from our Objective EDRMS on-premise solution, and we thought we were turning off Objective, but it turns out we actually have a number of Objective instances in various other parts of the organisation, and the only thing we actually migrated was our core records management solution. We still have, even post-migration, content living in a massive variety of locations, and I'm a bit afraid that we haven't actually helped people to understand what all those different places are, and how they should be working. And this is largely, again, driven by our IT team. So we have a go-to-cloud strategy. Very important. Get off-premise, move things to cloud. But we haven't thought about how does this actually function for our end users. So Record Point, they've done a great job in implementing our record management repository with content living in SharePoint. We also have an E5 license and hope to do some more things from using the compliance functionality, so being able to classify information as official and be able to use the compliance functionality to be able to identify where all that metadata is around content across the tenancy. But largely we have done this lift and shift from Objective into a SharePoint environment. So lots of things to focus on, and this is the main area. Culture change should come as no shock. So we need to really help all the people in our organisations to understand what modernising records and information governance actually means to your organisation. We need to do these simple things like disconnecting the ability to connect our email, from our objective instance where most of our staff used to live. We need to teach people, and so this is probably rethinking. Everybody probably turned on an intranet during COVID, and they probably did it in a way that was quick, fast now, and probably said, all right, everybody go and work in that location. But did you teach them how to do version control? Did you show them where they should be working? Did you show them or ask IT to turn on the technology so that when you open an email, it doesn't actually open in OneDrive, but it opens in the cloud version? Version control, this is personal bugbear. I cannot stand having to work, and I have to keep teaching all of my senior leaders across the organisation to stop emailing me a version of the truth that will be superseded by the time you sign it, or by the time somebody else comments on it. Where are we commenting on all that stuff? Where are we updating that material? Sharing content in a way that allows people to create and understand and build on the content, collaborate together. That's the way we all work now. We also need to have an understanding of what automatic metadata is applied, where and by what tool and functionality. So we are not a very heavy metadata organisation, and we've mandated that we're going to apply manual metadata fields to our content in our SharePoint location. Please show me anyone whose their staff knows how to do that. Because again, it's using a technology in a way that the general business user doesn't necessarily want to interact with. So I work to a policy general manager and I work in a policy team. None of the policy people want to know anything about the technology in SharePoint at all. They don't care, they don't want to know. They just want to know how to write their ministerial brief and make sure that the right processes are followed to get that up. They don't want to have to come back into SharePoint, open up a folder and apply metadata manually to content so that it is creating the record for them. They're expecting the system to do that little bit of work on their behalf. So we need to understand what can and can't be achieved automatically and how we can use automatic processes with all of the tools we're all investing in all the time to be able to tag the content that is a record and the stuff that doesn't need to be kept as a record so you can get rid of it. We all need to understand how to use this technology. So from our investment in Record Point, we've got a core group of people who really need to understand how that works under the hood, and I need to make sure that those people know what they're doing in that space. And then I need to teach the rest of the business how to use the 365 technology stack so that we're getting our return on investment, because everybody in this room knows that to actually get a project up, to implement a new record management solution, requires you to be able to show a return on investment. How hard is that? How hard? For years. So the project that I'm talking about, the implementation of our Record Point solution, started, I think, 3 years before I started at IP Australia. So it took 4 years for us to convince our executive that we needed to upgrade our record management solution. Massive return on investment is put in that business case. So how can you actually deliver on that? Because otherwise it's going to be another 10 years before I can ask for money to be able to do the next upgrade of that technology stack, because I haven't been able to show a return on investment. All of us need to spend a lot of time helping to support our staff to understand what are their record-keeping obligations. It may be that some of your team only needs to keep stuff for 2 years. It also might be that using OneDrive for your personal information is actually not great business practice, and anything that you put in there actually isn't a business record and does not need to be kept. People need to be educated about that, because there are assumptions as people have moved from on-premise technology to cloud technology and how they use that. And really make it easy to declare NAP, because there's a whole lot of stuff in those systems that we actually don't need to keep. We're all going to start paying for storage. So our next steps and some lessons. So all record managers, I think, need to be part of this future. We need to collaborate and connect and ask lots of questions about what are our future information management repositories, where do we want to keep that content, and what do we want to be using it for. So back to this morning's conversation, fascinating presentation, start playing with the tech. We've just turned on a non-production instance of 365 so that we can get a better understanding of how we can be showing the business how they should be using the technology that we've invested in. Need to ask questions about cost models and what that long-term investment is. And take a look at modernising your disposal schedules. I think some of ours were probably last reviewed, I want to say 2002, one of them. That's a long time to have not looked at a disposal schedule when your technology has shifted potentially 2 to 3 times in that time frame. So have a look at those and have a think about how your business might need to modernise those. Obviously, we all need to keep, govern, store information, but we also need to look at disposing things. We all have, well, I've got 4,000 unread emails. I'm probably sure that they can go straight to trash. But I've been in an organisation for 12 months and I think I have 25,000 emails sitting there. Obviously, not all of those are records, but some of them are. And so we need to be looking at ways we can really support people keeping the right things. I'm a huge advocate for learning. I want my staff to spend time learning how to use the technology that we've invested in, and I think I've probably said that 10 times in this conversation. Give your staff time to learn. Go and learn. Go and spend some time looking even at just YouTube videos about how the technology that you've got or that you know that is coming is going to work for you. Talk to people, collaborate. Basically get an understanding of things and look at ways at how you can use artificial intelligence, automation to be able to help you to do your job. And work out, I think this is something we all want to do. We've got content proliferation happening absolutely everywhere. If you can reduce one email or one piece of content down to just one piece of content and not have 5 versions of it living in various people's OneDrives, plus the version living in SharePoint, plus the version that's being sent to the Minister's office, that would be amazing. But we're a long way to go. So please embrace the modern way of working. Think about the digital first method of thinking about information and records management, because I think it's really exciting. If we can use tools in a way that makes our life easier, but also preserves all of that rich digital content that we're creating for other reasons, purposes, and for the future of all. So that's it. And if anybody would like to ask any questions, please, happy to have a conversation, or you can reach out to me.